Hi, I'm Garm and Watt, and this is Midgardia's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with Watt. How's it going?
Very good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. So, here to tell us about Cloud Empress. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So Cloud Empress is a expansive Nausicaa-inspired mothership setting. Mothership is a pretty popular now sci-fi horror role-playing game, and it has this panic system. And so Mothership is a setting that's ecologically based and science fantasy, which is sort of unique to the setting. I've heard many times people say, well, is there a fantasy setting for Mothership? And that was part of the inspiration for creating this setting. And it's set to be released or kickstarted, I should say, in January 2023.
Right on, right on. So, I take it there are a lot of cicadas in Mothership. Can you tell me about all of the cicadas?
Yeah, so one of the core features that distinguishes Cloud Empress from other things is it takes place, at least the first setting book takes place in the land of 10,000 cicadas. And it is a Earth in the far, far future. One of the things, I grew up in Midwest America, and I was very surprised and interested to find that there are these decade long sort of gestational periods for cicadas. And so they're around anywhere from like 13 to 16 to 7 years. It sort of depends on the individual brood. But during those time periods, and I've lived through a couple of them now, many, many thousands and thousands of cicadas will sort of unearth. And scientists have some speculation for why that happens as a variety of different survival mechanisms. Either the birds can't eat them fast enough or just other factors maybe related to the ice age. But the idea was to take some of the inspiration from Nausicaa and Dune and use this thing that was very related to my upbringing in the Midwest and really thinking about the ecological space of Illinois, where I grew up, and other places in the Midwest, to try and frame a science fantasy setting that would have these ecological themes. And one of my real goals for the project is to inspire people, whether it's the warden or referee of the game or the players, to really think about their natural resources in a different way, particularly just developing a curiosity for maybe some of the natural plants and animals in their area. I don't want it to be certainly a lecture, but one of the hopes of the project is maybe getting people a little bit more interested in cicadas. I know that's kind of goofy, but the world is Earth is a pretty strange and phenomenal place, and I think it's easy to lose a curiosity for what's happening. Everything, the natural world can be viewed as a resource by many, and so how do we think about it in a way that is kind of wondrous fantasy and science fiction for some of those things that really exist in our real world?
I am 100% behind anything that teaches people about the prime numbers of years between gestational periods for cicadas because that is so cool.
Well, just a bug that lives for 13 years is just amazing. It's kind of freaky. It's a real science fiction horror aspect. And I think that's the other thing I'm really trying to explore with this is, as a human being myself, I think it's very easy to view nature as this peaceful, beautiful place. But I always think about the fact that a lot of birds and animals we see are just kind of in a daily struggle to survive. I'm sure they have some peaceful moments, but that sort of duality that I think Mothership was a great fit for, that there can be some beautiful moments. I think Studio Ghibli has a lot of this in their creations and Hayao Miyazaki's creations, where there are these beautiful moments where sort of the music swells and we're find peace and serenity in nature. But there are also these moments where, especially in a world that we're imagining in this game, where humans are not the apex predator, it creates a new sense of terror that I think is almost intrinsic to our animal beings, that other part of ourselves that we don't necessarily rely on that much anymore.
Right, absolutely. In the global north or whatever you'd like to call it, we're certainly a bit removed from a lot of the dangers of wildlife, and we tend to have this view that nature is this stable, peaceful
Mhm.
kind of thing, but it's really not. Like there are so many, patterns and systems at work that we don't really realize until you stare at a place for like 5 or 10 years.
And
And that
one of the things, yeah, that's an interesting point too around that idea of like stability and change, and that's another thing that I've been really thinking about. One of the themes and topics I'm trying to explore is balance. And so the kickoff for the setting and the overarching conflict that exists in the world of Cloud Empress, which players will engage with in a sort of sandbox style, is the Cloud Empress disappears and goes to the Earth below. There's sort of this cloud. There's sort of these tethered stations that are tethered from outer space to the Earth and floating. So there's this impetus from that group to come down to the land below, the polluted land below, and sort of start to change things and take things over and find the Cloud Empress. But that balance idea has been really interesting. One of the real oh my gosh moments for me has been learning about First People and Indigenous peoples' land stewardship. And that was something I'd never been taught. I really had no knowledge of. But the idea that when some of the first settlers I learned about in history, white settlers and colonizers in history, when they came to North America, America, whatever you want to call it, they perceived the land as virgin and untamed and all this kind of stuff. But the more that we're learning and that what indigenous and first people are telling us is that this is actually the work of thousands of and tens of thousands of years of cultivation to create a sustainable environment. And so as one of the big concerns I have and many have is climate change and how do we come into a world that is sustainable. There's so many lessons that we can learn from the past about what that might look like, and engaging players in a space where they're asked to try to create a sustainable world. I don't know, on a small scale, at an adventure in an interaction with an NPC, really grounded in gameplay.
right. I mean, it's all about stuff like, not taking all of the blueberries from a blueberry bush so that, things will regrow next year, that kind of thing. Like those kinds of lessons were not learned by the, European settlers that first came here, and that led to a lot of very bad things, to put it
And
very mildly.
we, some of the like greed aspects and what does one of the ideas of the book that is another just kind of thing, the degrowth movement, which I'm not an expert on by any means, but this idea that in order for humanity to survive, we'll probably need to stop consuming as much. We can't be in this pattern of growth after year. There's just not a space for us to grow much more. And that presents a number of complexities, obviously, and challenges, both ethical, economic, governmental, all sorts of stuff. But one of the ideas of the book is that there was a society that was highly advanced, and that society is left. And the current group of humans live in the rubble of that, the junk that had been created. And one of my sort of horrific realization, I do a little bit of trash pickup in my neighborhood, and I started to realize, as an artist, there's a part of me that wants to be around after I die. Like, oh, I want my creativity and the things I create to carry on for generations. I mean, that's kind of a neat idea. It can be kind of a trap at times for I think a lot of creative folks. But what I realized was, the way that I'm going to be around is by the trash I leave, the water bottles I drink, the stuff I buy. That stuff's going to survive me for 1,000 years. And what else really on Earth is going to survive that long? Well, our bones, our plates, and our trash. And so that was sort of the idea. A lot of the characters and humans in the game, they don't need to create because they can dig into the earth and find all of these artifacts, relics, and junk that is overgrown but still readily accessible. And sort of their relationship has become one of both abundance and also a thoughtfulness around what does it mean to create versus to reuse.
Right. I really like reusing things being a thematic element of this game, because the that is the second part of the reduce, reuse, recycle thing, and we tend to just skip to recycle because it's the one that requires the least thought, the one that we can theoretically systematize the most easy, but it's not the most efficient, it's not the best one.
thinking about the energy and one of the challenges I've been having is trying to make the product release of this as eco-friendly as possible. And I have a bunch of bag samples I'm playing around with. I'm like compostable friendly bags and all sorts of stuff. So I'm thinking about too, if I'm going to make a game that's ecologically focused, how do I do that in a way that's at least ecologically thoughtful? And I'm a very small independent creator, and so there's obviously limitations to that. And I also know that holding a physical book and a physical material is really important to people, and people hold on to that and cherish those things. So I'm not sort of against owning things. Um, but how do we do that in a responsible way and in a thoughtful way? Yeah, I know. It's not an easy question, I find.
Yeah, yeah,
Especially on Kickstarter, which is like the more place, right? I mean, that's a place that I have to engage with in order to support the team and the artwork and the writing that I want to create. But it is a place that is sort of about endless consumption, and so I have some uh, conflict about that. But ultimately, I hope to reach an audience and create something that speaks to people both in a fun way. The game's really meant to be fun and enjoyable and an adventure and a horror story and all sorts of other things, but with some thematic challenges and um, one of my sort of core design principles right now is creating games that are easy to play but intellectually challenging. And I think sometimes, not as a criticism, but sometimes when games become easier to play, oftentimes they're associated with a more kid-friendly theme. And so, how do we imagine spaces, especially for a lot of my queer friends that don't have as long a history in gaming, that want to play gaming, but whether it's because of just an inexperience with gaming or trauma or different other things like sometimes it's really intense and challenging to engage with a big rule system, a giant hex map, those kind of things. So creating an accessible space for players to play in, but one that doesn't, or I should say, one that allows players to engage with intellectually challenging ideas and not just shoot everything. I think that's the other piece. This isn't a shooting gallery for players to kill a bunch of giant cicadas, hopefully. I mean, I'm sure that people will do that, but gameplay wise, there are things to kind of lead you away from that as well.
I might do that. I'm gonna be honest. I do deeply appreciate the deeper philosophical aspects here, but I might just hit things with swords.
That's okay too. I think one of the things that folks will find though with the mothership system, which is one of the reasons I first latched onto it and really appreciate it, is you are a very feeble thing in the world of mothership. So, you know, that's not stopping players from taking risks, but those risks may not always pay off.
Oh yeah, just to be clear, I expect to die to cicadas horribly several times in this venture. I am just a simple dude with a blade or possibly a pistol. Um, yeah, so we've talked a lot about the loftier design and philosophy aspects of Cloud Empress, but how does the average like adventure slash session go?
So the average session, it's a little bit interesting because it's made to be sort of a modular experience. The world is set up in a hex map, so there are these different hexes that players can navigate in a sandbox setting. So you might meet someone and they may tell you about something that might have some interest to you over on the other side of the map, and you might make a journey over to that area. There will be encounters and adventures along the way, but there's going to be around um, 5 sort of key adventure locations that I'm developing that'll be a little bit deeper. Um, they're sort of dungeons, I guess. I don't there's not really dungeons in this world, but they're dungeons, more advanced locations that require a little bit more time and engagement. So that'll be one thing, navigating the world and heading to these different locations, meeting these different NPCs, and engaging with this larger world conflict. But the other thing I know from my own experience is that it's really hard to get a group of people together to play an RPG. And so all of these sort of adventure locations are really meant to be engaging one shots or two session games, because I know that, hey, even if we get a group together, we might not be able to get that same group together the next week. And so having that ability to just pick up and play something. I think the other thing I really love about Mothership that I've even tried to streamline further with Cloud Empress is how quick you can generate a character. And so I've actually taken out some of the, Mothership character creation takes 5 minutes. You can roll up a character really quickly, but I've even taken things a step further where streamlining some of the skills in Mothership, there's different tiers of skills that can take some time to pick things out and understand, okay, well, I want this expert skill, so what trained skill do I need to pick? And so those are things that I've removed. So you just pick a certain number of skills. And so an experienced person can roll up a character in like 2 minutes. Someone new, it might take 10 minutes. But that's the other piece, jumping into the play and the engagement and developing character and stories as you play, rather than maybe a 2-hour session 0 where you're really developing this party. That would be interesting and fun too. But the quick character creation also supports, like that, like you were saying earlier, the player that may want to attack the cicada. Well, if they don't make it, they can get another character pretty quick. And the other, this is the goofiest system, and one of the things, the themes of a lot of Hayao Miyazaki's work is this idea of being cursed and having a curse. Those kind of things keep showing up, and what does that mean? And I think a lot of queer people, trans people can relate to, I don't know, being different, feeling like an outsider, feeling cursed. And so the other interesting mechanism that can show some of the goofy tone, I would say, of the game is when you die, roll on a curse table, and it's sort of your death, your spirit, potentially leaving your body, can cause some strange things to happen. And so there's a number of curses that you can get instead of dying. Some of them are becoming, half animal, half person, some kind of chimera. But some of them are like becoming an animated, inanimate object. So like Beauty and the Beast, you might become a chair. And so all of a sudden you're a walking, talking chair. Hopefully people appreciate that. I think it's wonderful and a lot of fun. So there is a real sense of humor, I think, to things as well. But you might end up having to play the game as a walking, talking chair that's probably a lot more vulnerable to fire and all sorts of other things too.
Like the bit in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where they get turned into couches. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I love some of the one of the reasons that got me back into role playing games was the OSR, the old school Renaissance. And what I most appreciate about it, I don't have any strong connections to like old school role playing, although I did play, I got into 3.5 a little bit, but I really appreciated how wacky some of these ideas were. It's a candle that when you blow it out, everyone blows up in the sky. There's just all sorts of really interesting ideas and less of a concern about figuring out the rules for everything. And we'll see how Mothership players react to that. I think I need to find that middle ground where there is some level of rules but one of the things about the game, I think, is playing with a group of players that are not playing competitively. I think this is not a system that will work great for the warden versus the players. This is a system for collaborative storytelling with a warden serving an important role, but all of us are holding this world together collectively.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, there are very few that really work super well as the entirely combative like form of play. That's what Descent is for, if people really want that.
Well, and that's the thing that I shouldn't even talk about Dungeons and Dragons really, but I played Pathfinder, so I'll talk about Pathfinder. But so much of I played a lot of power gamers, and so it was, well, if I two-hand two bastard swords, then I'll do this much damage, and then I found this rule which I can interpret this way, and that makes refereeing a game really stressful. And like you said, I mean, there might be better places to for me to explore. There are, let me put it this way, there's better places for me to explore that type of power fantasy or I think some of those players, I like doing that sometimes too, but it's about the numbers. How can I make the biggest number? Well, I can do that in Final Fantasy 14, or I can do that in a different game setting. So that's kind of where I've gotten that outlet for some of my optimization needs.
Yeah. I've never really understood that impulse, but there's a lot of different players and a lot of different styles of play, all of
Yeah.
which are equally valid, I guess. But yeah, no, this looks lovely. There are horrible psychic powers, I believe. Is that true?
So there is I wouldn't, yeah, I guess I'm like, they're not, yeah, they are kind of horrible. One of the things that I wanted to explore and one of the starting places for Cloud Empress was what if there was magic in Mothership? The ultimate power fantasy I have is being a wizard, right? I'm the type of person that loves magic. I mean, it just seems so cool. I get that swinging an axe around is amazing, but just shooting fire out of your hands, I mean, that's just a whole nother level of possibility for me. Not knocking anybody that likes to play, other classes, but that's me. Being a wizard or a mage or something like that, that's so cool. So I tried to think about, well, what would that look like in Mothership, and what would that look like in my own experience? What does power feel like in my real life? And the place that I settled on is magic in Cloud Empress has a cost to it. So everything you do has some consequence. I would joke with some friends, I would say in high school and college, and we talk about superpowers and we talk about, well, what would that be like to live with time travel? And you'd probably have a lot of mental illness from being able to go back and forth in time, or different things like that would be deeply troubling to people. I think that our human brains were not designed to jump through time. So with every spell there comes a cost, and the first cost is a resource called chalk, which is gathered from the shells of these giant cicadas, and it's a magical resource that's sort of refined into sticks of chalk and crystals. And folks can spread that and use an incantation to cast a spell, or they can eat that and do all sorts of goofy stuff with their body, like growing giant. But let's take growing big, for example. If you cast this, grow giant spell, you'll get big. But because your body's so big, you need a lot more food. So the consequence is you need to eat like 5 to 8 times the food that you would normally eat, or you will die. Your body will not go on living. And so there's a direct consequence to that that I think is pretty goofy. So as you're casting the spell, you're also thinking, okay, well, how am I going to get the food I'll need to eat? I got, Paul Bunyan with a giant pancakes kind of thing. So each spell you cast has some kind of cost associated with it that's both um, you can turn stuff into gold, but similar to Midas, everything you touch with your hands turns to gold, and so you'll need someone to feed you for the next week. Stuff like that, really thinking about some maybe somewhat logical, somewhat goofy realities around what casting a spell might look like.
That's excellent. Yeah, because this isn't the Vancian magic. This is doing weird stuff to your body with like cicada dust.
And I just find too in my life, power is addictive. Power is not good for us all the time. And so what does it mean to live out a power fantasy? Well, there's some cost to that. And this is a pretty kind of on the nose one-to-one directive. But one of the other kind of themes and rules actually in Cloud Empress is that there's no old magicians. So if you want to be a magician, you can't be old. And the reason for that is old magicians, they either retire or they die. There is not a sustainable way to be using this chalk on a regular basis and live to old age. And so what happens to these, if you're playing a magician, Do you burn out in a blaze of glory at a young age, or do you find a more sustainable way to live?
Right, right. Much like much like the classic adventure of various other games. Well-adjusted people don't really do this. Not for long, at least.
And there's a sort of I wouldn't call it a faction, but a group of people called treasure hunters in Cloud Empress. And these are, I mean, they're treasure hunters. So their real primary goal is to go around the world, go around these cicada locations and see what they can get out of them. Kill what they can, salvage what they can, steal what they can. And so they are sort of a reflection, I think, on some of the ways that I used to play Pathfinder and D&D and other things in that, um, how can we embody and look at the view of the world as a resource, the world as a roller coaster, the world as an amusement park, versus characters that maybe are looking to embody and live in the world in sort of a different way.
Yeah, and that's like not necessarily to say that, you're a bad person for playing D&D as a horrible murder hobo who's there to take treasure and stuff. Like, it's a game, but you have to be at least kind of aware of that.
And I think too, this is a one reflection of one world, and I certainly play other games. I think who we are in games is always some level of a reflection of us, but what that reflection means is sort of pretty obscure. And I think one of the things that I'm most attracted to role playing games and gaming in general is just the ability to um, heal trauma with joy, heal trauma with humor. It's not therapy, I don't think, but it can in a clinical sense, but that community connectiveness, that building relationships, all of those things. And I think the world is a very tough place. I think pretty much everyone agrees on that and how we process that and what we do with that information. Um, some people use that to say that it should be hard for other people. Some people use that to say it should be easier for other people, and when we're all in the middle somewhere probably. But I think folks going in a dungeon and killing some goblins, like maybe has its place. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I got the crap kicked out of me a few times as a kid, and I've got some physical issues, so gonna go take an axe and beat the crap out of some goblins in a fantasy game is, yeah, it's fun. It's liberating, as they would say.
And I
Yeah.
think there is a place for games where there is a true evil. This is a game that says what is evil. Let's complexify this character. That's one of the things that really most impressed me at a young age about Hayao Miyazaki's work is that, especially in his later works and sort of some of his key works, the villains and the antagonists and the people committing the worst evils have very relatable motives or motives that are just simply in conflict with the natural world, and that's something that has really resonated with me. But I do also understand we live in a world that's like that. We live in a complex world that's difficult to understand, and so I also get why someone might want to play in a world that is simple. A lot of, especially video game role playing games, um, hey, can you solve this? These two factions are fighting. Can you come solve this in 15 minutes? Okay, and then oh wow, we worked this all out. We know that that's not how stuff works in real life, but it certainly feels good. I think sometimes when we do it in games.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a nice outlet. Unfortunately, yes, the real world is much more complicated.
Yeah, one of the inspirations for the game is specifically Star Wars: A New Hope because of I don't know some of its kitschiness and connection to fantasy in a way that I think other Star Wars don't have. But I remember seeing Rogue One, and my opinions changed a little bit since then. But and since I've seen Andor, but seeing Rogue One in theaters, I was like, why do the rebels need to torture people? Like, why did we need to put this in a movie? Like, can't they just be the good people who are blowing up the Death Star? And I do understand too. I mean, there's certainly something to be said about aspirational media, and you know, especially I know Last Jedi. We won't get into that, but when we tarnish our heroes, when we complexify the Rebel Alliance, there is a cost to that, and it's not always welcome.
I mean, I think it's certainly worth remembering that, war is hell and violence is bad, and any war, no matter how just, has immeasurable human costs. But, yeah, no, torture bad. We should not do that.
And I think the movie, I mean, I think that looking back at it now, I mean, I saw it in theaters and I was just so surprised, but I think the movie really sort of investigates that, and maybe not in a, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't spend a lot of time in that investigation, but I think the whole movie really is sort of this look into, do the ends justify the means, and what does it mean to use the tools of your enemy to accomplish your goals, which is certainly a very interesting discussion.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's
Or more explicitly, obviously, I mean, there's some direct lines that interrogate that idea too.
I need to watch Andor so bad.
It's not a light watch, but I certainly was very surprised when I watched it.
Yeah, no, that's I've heard wonderful things, and no, I'm not expecting it to be a light fun sword swinging time. Um, but yes, Cloud Empress. I it does come with a starting adventure, I see, which is excellent news. I am personally of the belief that every game should.
And the way that the books are broken down, which folks will see on the Kickstarter soon enough, but there will be two books. There's the rules mutation, we're calling it, but it's a rules hack of Mothership. So I've changed some rules about the way that Mothership's played. And that includes the starting adventure, Last Voyage of the Bean Barge, where you're traveling down from the skies above and a bunch of cicadas are clinging to your ship, trying to eat your chalk energy drives of the ship. So that's sort of one book that sort of it will be free. That's going to be sort of perpetually free, but if folks want to get a print copy, the Kickstarter is going to be a great way to do that with a bundle. The second book is the setting book, Cloud Empress in the Land of 10,000 Cicadas. And that's really focused on what does this polluted farmland, unexplored, different regions, industrial apocalypse kind of area, what's going on with that whole area, and what's up with this Cloud Empress disappearing. And so that is the sandbox hex crawl 5 adventures that I'm personally writing and designing. And then this is sort of a I don't know, first time I'm sharing this, but there's going to be a 5 pamphlet adventures that are going to go along with this too, in this final bundle, this deluxe bundle, made by 5 different creators. So each creator is creating a new pamphlet. And I tried to pick a really interesting, cool, like different background group of people, some who have written for Mothership a lot, some who haven't, to explore this world in a different adventure location each. And my real hope for that is that this will feel like a world that anyone can create stories in. One of my least favorite ideas for certain RPG systems is that you need to read the massive lore book in order to run it. And especially when 2 people have read that and then they're fighting over what's well, that's not how it is, or the TIE fighter doesn't fly like that, it flies like this. And so the idea for this is, let's demonstrate how other people can create stories in this world, how those stories may conflict with what I've put together. That's cool, that's fine. And really encourage players to, and wardens, people running the game, to feel like it's their world. Once you open this book up, once you start a session, once you start thinking about it, I'm not going to come tell you you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, I think one of the long-term cultural effects of these sort of mega franchises, the MCU, Star Wars, all that kind of stuff is this like weird rigidization of canon, even in people's like little home games.
Well, and I was in a work meeting and someone's icebreaker or something was who would win in a fight, Superman or the Hulk? And I guess I didn't know the Hulk could breathe in space. I've read a number of Hulk comics, but I missed that one where he was breathing in space. I guess maybe World War Hulk he was in space at one point, but and then Bruce, so it's these whole especially too because a lot of this media is not created in an encyclopedic way. A single person has a story they want to tell, and now it becomes canon, right? Forevermore. Apparently, Hulk has a gland in his body that creates oxygen.
Oh
So,
yeah, of course. Like, why wouldn't he? Yeah, and that's how we end up with like Jedi Master Bates and Jedi Master Shaggy being perpetual canon because somebody snuck them in a comic once.
I'm not familiar with that, but that does not surprise me. Or the rabbit, I forget that rabbit that they had a Star Wars rabbit comic series that was kind of goofy that people thought was going to be in the Han Solo movie.
Uh, no, the Master Bates thing is friggin' hilarious. Honestly, there was some editor that like would always change Jedi to Jedi Master, or like make sure they're always addressed as Master, no matter what anybody wrote. So somebody created Jedi Knight Bates and then sent it off to the editor, and he didn't pick up on it.
And now we have that in the extended universe or the canon.
Yep, it's here forever now. That might be
Trivia
Legends, but
for the
still,
yeah the rest of the time.
yeah, that's bar trivia. But like that stuff doesn't matter, honestly.
Well, and I was reading too some interesting criticism. My educational background was reading something like Jane Eyre. Let's look at all the intentional things this author did, and all of the. It was like the Da Vinci Code of theme. Well, I think when I think it's Charlotte Bronte. When Charlotte Bronte said this in this sentence, she's actually connecting this theme and now as an artist who's an adult, it's like I don't make stuff like that. I mean, you certainly heard me talk a lot about some of the themes that I want to explore, but there's not a direct line hardly ever to a theme I'm interested in and a one-to-one. And if I do that, it's usually pretty bad writing, at least in my experience. If I'm trying to say, well, this theme I'm going to communicate in this way, a lot of times that's pretty heavy-handed or kind of nail on the head type of writing, I find, at least when I'm doing it.
One final harp on Star Wars, like every time somebody, writing something before the series decides to heavy-handedly allude to things later, like making Anakin say, "I would never wear or I can't imagine living life behind a mask" in one of the Clone Wars comics, and it's like, stop that. It's not,
Too much.
yeah, that's not interesting. It's not funny. It's not insightful. It's just shut
When
up.
I watched, I guess we'll just talk a lot about Star Wars, but I watched George Lucas on why Anakin created C-3PO stuff, and I just remember the criticism of why would a boy who's a literal slave create a protocol droid? Like a negotiation diplomat droid? It's like, not everything needs to connect, okay? I think there was some theme about, being a machine or creating machines or something that George was exploring, but let's go with the logic of the world a little bit.
Yeah, like of all the things in the prequel trilogy, my least favorite is having Anakin have made C-3PO and R2-D2. Like that was
And
so
maybe friends
unnecessary.
with Greedo. I think I don't know if they changed that or not, but that's what I always heard that Greedo is also in the pod racing scene. So it's like, okay,
It's certainly possible, but everything needs to tie neatly into this little bow.
yeah, there's 40 people in the Star Wars universe that are just constantly running into each other with a scene of extras.
Yeah. I do actually like Star Wars, dear viewers, I promise. I'm listening to a Star Wars audiobook is what I'll be doing after this. But
And
yeah.
New Hope, I mean, big inspiration for this. And I would say with Cloud Empress, just to connect back there again, one of the things I'm exploring is like this is a world with not a lot of people. Um, so people do all kind of know each other. There's a lot of knowing each other happening, relations and all those sorts of things. So kind of explicitly doing something like that in the game where people are connected in a number of different ways, and what kind of possibilities that might mean for a story or an adventure or a conflict.
Right, because a world where everybody, like, where there are that few people, there's a lot more social dynamic, a lot more past histories interfering with your ability to solve things or helping you solve things as it goes.
And so far as this book is concerned and the people of this world know, we'll see what happens. This is sort of supposed to be sort of a larger product line, and I have other book ideas that I've sort of built into the foundation of this, but um, this is sort of a small place that's inhabitable. There aren't other places like this, so it's a pretty amazing place that people can still live here. But that also means that it's not you're running into people. I mean, it's sparse, but people do come together and they do need to rely on each other. For instance, the cloudlings and the sky sort of they're essentially sky oil rigs. They're collecting non-polluted water, so they're bringing the non-polluted water down, and the polluted farmland is bringing up, probably be somewhat toxic, but they're bringing up the food, and so there's this relationship between these two that exists despite some conflict and some different values.
Right, absolutely. Well, at the risk of describing this game in possibly the least accessible anime metaphor I can come up with, it's like about 25% Blue Gender and 75% Shinsekai Yori. And if you've seen both of those, congratulations on being me.
I'm just learning about one. Blue Gender. I just saw some GIF about shooting a bunch of bugs. So I'm like, oh man, I have to. And I'm not sure the other one you just mentioned. So I've got to look into that too.
I will send you the names. And yes, like Blue Gender, it looks a lot like this. Yeah, there's probably,
Blue Submarine is it Blue Submarine number 6?
I
I
think
don't know if
so.
you've seen that one. That one's an inspiration, but not Blue Gender. I just learned about that, so I'm gonna have to check that one out.
It is some excellent 1992 anime.
That is the key, that the 90s is as 90s anime is a big inspiration for this, and I saw not to just talk a lot about anime now, but Angel's Egg. I don't know if you've seen that yet, but it's one of my favorite movies. It was very difficult to watch, but I love movies that really confuse me. I don't know, and just are sort of sensory overloads in a lot of ways. Um, so Angel Egg is a big one for me now.
I do have one last influences question. Uh,
Sure.
have you ever read Roadside Picnic?
Hmm.
All right, yeah. That's
And 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 I would say Stalker is like, it's interesting because Stalker must be one of the biggest influences in the indie TTRPG space, I think, and certainly the creator of Mothership, um, Sean McCoy, has referenced Roadside Picnic as a reference for Mothership. But it's interesting how like everything comes back to Mobius. You trace this line from Nausicaa's glider is directly connected to Mobius, and Nausicaa's are directly connected to Dune, which Mobius worked on the Jodorowsky film. So I'm trying to be a little bit more forgiving of my inspirations, knowing how connected some of this stuff is, and Stalker is one of those where, and I think one thing I will say, Roadside Picnic has, it's dark, but it has some really goofy stuff in it. There's a scene I particularly remember where I think one of a guy in a truck, like all his bones become floppy,
yeah, when
and
he
it's
falls
pretty
into the like
horrifying.
goo pit. Yeah.
So that's kind of some of the vibe with some of the curses and magic in this. It's like, well, your bones might get goopy for a couple weeks, or
Yeah,
you might one of your arms might become a noodle,
yeah,
but maybe you really need to cast the spell.
his were just gone. Like that is one of the parts of the book that stuck with me. Is that he like steps into this pit and then his bones are just gone. Like there's no other wounds, there's
I
nothing. It's just
Or goopy, yeah, man.
yeah.
Ugh. So body horror is yeah, definitely a big, it's sort of my nightmare, but I explore it in RPGs and make other people subject them to it. So
Such is the way of the designer.
Let's work out my angst on my audience.
Well, what? This is going up in January, I believe you said.
Yeah,
Do you know
so
when
going
about?
live, yeah, Tuesday, January 17th, and then it'll run into the first part of Zine Quest, 2023 on Kickstarter.
Right on, right on. And yes, if you're still watching this, you should pick this up. You can fight bugs, use their horrible shells to make yourself weird. Um, that doesn't sound fun, but I'm telling you, it is almost certainly very fun, and you can learn something about friendship and community along the way. Also, the art is really sick. Like I haven't mentioned it yet, but it is
Thank
fantastic.
you. And we're planning, I mean, there's going to be like 50 plus art pieces in this. I mean, this is a dream come true to be able to work with some of these artists. And, um, I do some of my own art, but I'm just it's so cool to be able to commission artwork and just be like, oh, I can, my idea could come to life in this way is just awesome.
A good feeling. All right. Well, Watt, it has been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
And yeah, for those of you watching, there are links below in the top comment. Go click those and then go back this. Have a good night, everybody.